Summer is supposed to be about fun vacations, late nights with friends, and memories that last forever. But hidden beneath the warmth of the season are chilling stories that prove the sunniest months can also hold the darkest nights. Tonight, we'll dive into 5 of the scariest true stories from this summer real encounters that will make you think twice before stepping outside after dark. It was early July, the kind of summer night that feels heavy, almost suffocating. The air was thick with humidity, and cicadas screamed from the trees outside. 21-year-old Lucas had just returned to his parents' cabin after a long day of hiking with his girlfriend. The cabin was tucked away deep in the woods of North Carolina, a place his family visited every summer. It wasn't fancy, just 2 bedrooms, a living space, and a porch that creaked every time you stepped on it, but to Lucas, it felt like a safe haven. That night, around 11 p.m., the two of them sat outside on the porch, talking quietly, staring at the stars through breaks in the tree line. The forest around them was dark, nearly pitch black beyond the small halo of light from the porch bulb. It was peaceful, until Lucas heard something unusual: branches snapping. Slowly, deliberately, somewhere beyond the yard. He froze mid-sentence, his girlfriend noticing the sudden tension in his posture. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. She nodded, wide-eyed. They sat still, listening. At first it could have been an animal: deer, raccoon, even a stray dog. But then the sound came again, closer this time, paired with the crunch of leaves under heavy steps. Someone or something was walking just beyond the tree line. Lucas got up and grabbed the flashlight by the door. When he pointed it toward the woods, the beam caught the faint glimmer of 2 eyeshine reflections, about 5 feet above the ground. They weren't animal eyes. They didn't glow yellow or dart away. They were still, human, watching. "Hello?" Lucas called out, his voice cracking slightly. No response, just silence. His girlfriend tugged at his arm, begging him to go inside, but Lucas felt compelled to stand his ground. He took a cautious step off the porch, the flashlight beam shaking slightly in his hands. As soon as his foot hit the grass, the eyes vanished. Whoever or whatever was there had turned away. They went inside, locking every door and window. But the night didn't end there. Around 2 a.m., Lucas woke up to the sound of slow, deliberate knocking on the side of the cabin. Not at the door, but along the wooden walls. 3 taps, a pause, then 3 more. He tried to convince himself it was just his imagination, but then his girlfriend stirred, whispering, "You hear it too, right?" The knocking continued for what felt like hours, moving from one side of the cabin to another. At one point, the doorknob rattled violently, as if someone was testing it. Lucas gripped a kitchen knife and stood by the front window, straining to see through the glass, and then he saw it. A figure, tall, thin, dressed in what looked like dark clothing, standing just at the edge of the yard, facing the cabin. The porch light wasn't strong enough to show a face, but he could make out the pale skin of hands hanging at its sides. It wasn't moving, just staring. He flicked the light switch to the porch, flooding the yard with brightness, but the figure was gone. No sound of running, no rustling in the trees, just gone, as if it had never been there at all. Neither Lucas nor his girlfriend slept that night. By morning, when sunlight finally pierced through the curtains, Lucas stepped outside to check the yard. The grass was bent, pressed down in several places, and there were clear footprints leading from the tree line toward the porch and then stopping, right at the bottom of the steps. He never found out who it was. Neighbors later told him that, years ago, a man had gone missing in those same woods. His body never recovered. Some say it was an accident, others believe he'd chosen to disappear. But the stories whispered among locals were darker, that he still wandered the forest at night, drawn to the cabins where people stayed. Lucas and his girlfriend cut their trip short, leaving that very morning, but he admitted later, in a trembling voice, that what haunted him most wasn't the footsteps or the knocking, it was that pair of unmoving eyes, reflecting the flashlight back at him, fixed on him with an intensity that felt almost inhuman. Summer had always been his favorite season. But after that night, the woods never felt like freedom anymore. They felt like a cage, holding something inside that wasn't supposed to be there, and he would never step foot on that porch again, without remembering the silent figure waiting at the edge of the dark. The second story comes from a girl named Kayla, who spent most of her summer working at a small beachside diner in Florida. She was 19, saving up money for college, and the job wasn't bad. Tourists came and went, the paychecks were steady, and she loved walking home with the sound of the ocean nearby. Her shifts often ended late, sometimes close to midnight. On those nights, the streets of the beach town were nearly empty, shops closed, boardwalk lights buzzing softly in the humid air. Normally, Kayla didn't mind walking the 10 minutes back to her apartment. The town was safe. Everyone knew everyone, and the police patrolled the area regularly. But one night, in late August, something felt wrong. She'd just locked up the diner, waving goodbye to her manager, when she noticed a man standing across the street. He wasn't doing anything, just leaning against a lamppost, staring in her direction. Kayla tried not to overthink it. People hung out on the boardwalk all the time. But as she started walking, she realized he was moving too slowly, carefully, just a few steps behind her. At first, she thought maybe he was going the same way. But every turn she took, every shortcut through alleys she normally used, he followed. His footsteps were steady, unhurried, as though he wasn't trying to catch up, just stay close enough. Kayla's heart raced. She slipped her phone out of her pocket and pretended to text, hoping it would make her look less vulnerable. But when she glanced in the reflection of a darkened store window, she saw his face clearly for the first time. He was tall, unshaven, with eyes that didn't blink, locked directly on her. By the time she reached the stretch of road leading to her apartment complex, her legs were trembling. She decided to risk it and sprint. She bolted down the street, keys already in her hand. Behind her, she heard the man's footsteps quicken, pounding harder against the pavement. She reached the gate of her building and shoved the key into the lock, praying it wouldn't jam. Just as the gate swung open, she looked over her shoulder and saw him standing only a few yards away, not running anymore, just standing, smiling faintly, as if he knew exactly where she lived. Kayla slammed the gate shut and ran upstairs to her apartment. She locked the door, pulled the curtains tight, and called her manager, her voice shaking. He stayed on the phone with her until she calmed down, promising to drive her home after shifts from then on. But the story doesn't end there. 2 nights later, Kayla came home from work to find something strange on her doorstep. A sea white and cracked down the middle resting against her doormat. At first, she thought maybe it was a prank, something a neighbor kid had left behind. But when she bent down to pick it up, she realized the shell wasn't just random. Etched into the surface, scratched crudely with something sharp, were the words, "See you soon." She dropped it instantly, her hands shaking. The police were called, but there wasn't much they could do. No cameras in the area had caught the man's face clearly, and he hadn't physically touched or threatened her. They told her to be careful, to always walk with someone if possible, and to call 911 if she saw him again. Kayla barely slept for the rest of that summer. Every night, she swore she could hear footsteps outside her apartment, the crunch of gravel just beyond her window. Once, she thought she saw a shadow move across her blinds, but when she pulled them back, no one was there. No one was there. By September, she quit her job at the diner and moved back in with her parents until college started. Even then, she couldn't shake the feeling that the man knew where she lived, that he could appear at any moment. And the seashell, she kept it in a box in her closet. She doesn't know why, maybe as proof, maybe as a reminder, but she admitted later that the sight of it still made her stomach twist. It was the kind of thing that felt more like a warning than a message. The ocean waves had always been her comfort, a lullaby that tucked her into sleep every summer night. But now, every time she heard them crash against the shore, All she could think of was the man's smile under the lamppost, and the words carved into that fragile shell. See you soon. The third story comes from a college student named Brian, who spent his summer working as a delivery driver in a Midwestern town. It wasn't a big city, just a quiet community surrounded by cornfields and old highways that stretched for miles. Deliveries usually went smoothly, but sometimes, late at night, the job could feel eerie. The streets would empty, houses went dark, and the long stretches of farmland were silent, broken only by the hum of his car engine. One Friday night, in late July, Brian got an order for a house way out on the edge of town. It wasn't unusual, plenty of people lived in isolated farmhouses. He punched the address into his GPS and started the drive. The road stretched on forever, lined with tall cornstalks that swayed gently in the warm breeze. His headlights barely cut through the darkness, and every so often he thought he saw movement between the rows. Probably animals, he told himself. Finally, the GPS announced he had arrived. The house was old, 2 stories, with peeling white paint and a sagging porch. But something felt wrong. There were no lights on inside, no cars in the driveway, no sound, not even crickets. Still, he grabbed the food bag, walked up the creaking steps, and knocked on the door. No answer. He knocked again. Still nothing. He checked the receipt to make sure he had the right address. It matched perfectly. Just as he was about to leave, the porch light flicked on, blinding him for a second. A woman's voice called from inside, muffled through the door. Just leave it there. Relieved, Brian set the bag down and started to step away. But then he froze. From the corner of his eye, he caught something in the window upstairs, a face, pale, with wide eyes, staring down at him. And just as quickly as he saw it, the curtains snapped shut. He glanced back at the door, suddenly uneasy. The voice from inside called again, "Leave it," but this time, it sounded different, deeper, almost like someone was straining to imitate the first voice. The hair on Brian's arms stood on end. He turned and practically ran back to his car, slamming the door shut and locking it. As he pulled out of the driveway, his headlights swept across the upstairs window again. The face was still there, pressed against the glass, watching him leave. When he got back to the restaurant, he mentioned it to his manager, half-jokingly saying the house was creepy. His manager's face went pale. He told Brian that the address didn't make sense. That house, he explained, had been abandoned for years after the woman who lived there disappeared without a trace. Brian didn't believe him at first, but later that night, curiosity got the better of him. He looked up the property online. Sure enough, the place had been empty since 2014. Neighbors had long whispered that it was haunted, that sometimes you could hear the missing woman's voice calling from inside. Brian swore he wasn't imagining the face in the window or the strange change in the voice. He refused to ever take another delivery to that part of town again. But here's where it gets worse. A week later, when Brian finished a late shift, he returned to his car in the parking lot. Sitting on the hood was a takeout bag, the same kind he used for deliveries. Inside wasn't food, but a piece of paper. Written in jagged handwriting were the words, "Thanks for stopping by. Come back soon." He never told anyone about that part. He just quit the job at the end of the summer and left for school, determined to forget it ever happened. But sometimes, he admitted, when he's driving late at night on a lonely road, he still feels like someone is watching him from the darkness, waiting for him to make one wrong turn back to that house. Summer is supposed to be the season of freedom, trips to the beach, late night adventures, and memories that warm us through the colder months. But, as you've heard tonight, not every summer story is about laughter and sunlight. Some are filled with shadows, with eyes watching from the darkness, with knocks on the door that should never come, and faces staring back at you from places that should be empty. If these stories send chills down your spine, make sure to hit the like button. It really helps more than you know. And if you're new here, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next upload. I share disturbing true experiences and terrifying encounters that remind us how close fear can really be. Now, I want to hear from you. What's the scariest thing that's ever happened to you during the summer? Did you ever have a night that didn't end the way you expected? Share your experience in the comments below. Never know, it might be featured in a future video. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, summer might be bright, but even in the warmest season, the shadows are never far away. Those are never far away.